It was a clear but sultry morning, remembered Yoko Kuwabara, Kuwabara, who was a 13-year-old girl, on the morning of August 6, 1945. The midsummer sun was so bright it almost hurt my eyes. She had just finished breakfast at her family's home in Hiroshima when she noticed the time. It was already past 7. I'll be late for school. I started getting ready for school in a hurry. Yoko raced down the street to the streetcar stop near her home. A streetcar soon came, and she climbed into the crowded car. I pushed my way through until I was standing behind the driver, she said. Through the windshield, I looked at the pedestrians hurrying on their way. We were 8 minutes away from the scheduled time of the bomb release when the city came into view, recalled Paul Tibbets. The early morning sunlight glistened off the white buildings in the distance. Through 31,000 feet of clear sky, Hiroshima looked just like the pictures Tibbets had studied. Located on the southeastern coast of Japan, the city stood on 6 long, flat islands. Between the islands ran branches of the Ota River as it fanned out into a delta near the sea. This was Japan's 8th largest city, in the location of an important army base. On August 6th, there were about 280,000 civilians living in Hiroshima and 43,000 soldiers. Tibbets bombardier Thomas Freeby pressed his left eye against his bomb sight, giving him a magnified view of the city below. It was his job to aim the bomb at the T-shaped Ao Bridge, a centrally located feature that could be identified from high in the air. "Okay, I've got the bridge," announced Farabee. Farabee pointed toward the target. Theodore Van Kirk, the navigator, looked down, comparing the view from the nose of the plane with the photo of the Ao Bridge in his hand. "No question about it," Van Kirk agreed. Tibbets guided the plane toward the bridge. "We're on target," said Farabee. Tibbets picked up the intercom and said, "Put on your goggles. Place them up on your forehead. When the countdown starts, pull the goggles over your eyes and leave them there until after the flash." At 8:15, the bomb bay doors opened. The bomb dropped out and fell toward the city. With the release of the bomb, the plane was instantly 9,000 pounds lighter, Tibbets said. As a result, its nose leaped up sharply, and I had to quickly execute the most important task of the flight, to put as much distance as possible between our plane and the point at which the bomb would explode. 43 seconds after dropping from the plane at an altitude of 1,900 feet above Hiroshima, the bomb's 2 pieces of uranium slammed together, setting off an explosive chain reaction. The blinding flash and raging fireball looked just like the ones at Trinity, only this time there was a city underneath. The blast heated the ground beneath the explosion to over 5,000 degrees. Nearly every person within 1,000 yards in all directions was instantly killed. Many were vaporized. A 10-year-old boy named Shintaro Fukara was standing outside his school with his younger brother at the moment of the explosion. "I saw a red dragonfly winging along and finally alighting on the wall right in front of me," he remembered. "Just as my brother reached out to catch the dragonfly, there was a flash. I felt I'd suddenly been blown into a furnace. When I opened my eyes after being flung 8 yards, it was still dark, as if I were facing a wall painted black." Yoko Kuwabara was still on the crowded streetcar headed for school. "I was blinded for a moment by a piercing flash of bright light," she later said, and the air filled with yellow smoke like poison gas. Momentarily, it got so dark I couldn't see anything. There was a loud, dull, thunderous noise. The inside of my mouth was gritty, as if there were sand in it, and my throat hurt. Described by survivors all over the city, the sudden darkness was caused by the enormous amount of dust and debris thrown into the air by the force of the blast. The view, where a moment before had all been so bright and shiny, was now dark and hazy, said a doctor named Mihiko Hayaka. Pushing and wriggling out from under fallen pieces of his home, Hakaya stood. He was bleeding badly and his skin pierced with splinters and broken glass. Like people all over Hiroshima, he assumed a large but ordinary bomb had fallen right near him. Yeko-san, he called to his wife. Where are you? She rose from the rubble, bleeding, her clothes torn. We'll be all right, he told her. Only let's get out of here as fast as we can. Together they ran to the street. Hakiai tripped over something, looked down, and saw it was the body of a soldier crushed under a fallen gate. Then he looked out at the neighborhood and knew that this had been no ordinary bomb. Everywhere houses were swaying and falling, flames rising from the ruins. Yoko Kawabara tumbled out of the streetcar. Buildings all around her were on fire. I picked my way through the rubble and made it out to the main street, she said. I stood there dumbfounded. I heard children crying, buildings collapsing, men and women screaming. I saw the bright red blood and people with dazed expressions on their faces trying to get away. Where should I go? The 10-year-old boy, Shintaro Fukara, also felt the need to move, to get away. I had unconsciously taken my brother's hand and started running, he said. I just ran home as fast as I could. He passed people with horrible burns, their faces swollen, their blackened skin hanging in strips, bodies on the ground and bodies floating in the river. I cannot describe the countless tragic things I saw, he said. An image that haunted many in Hiroshima was the horrific parade of victims on the streets. They stagger exactly like sleepwalkers, said one survivor. Like walking ghosts, said another. They held their arms out in front of their chests like kangaroos, said a high school girl, with only their hands pointed downward. Dr. Hachiya saw this and as he was wobbling toward the hospital where he worked. They moved as though in pain, like scarecrows, their arms held out from their bodies with forearms and hands dangling, he said. These people puzzled me until I suddenly realized that they had been burned and were holding their arms out to prevent the painful friction of raw surfaces rubbing together. One thing was common to everyone I saw: complete silence. If I live 100 years, I'll never quite get these few minutes out of my mind, said Robert Lewis, co-pilot of the Enola Gay. The plane was 9 miles from the explosion when the bomb shock wave hit. The plane bounced, Theodore Van Kirk remembered. It jumped, and there was a noise like a piece of sheet metal snapping. Tibbets held tight to the controls. The plane was undamaged. Now that I knew we were safe from the effects of the blast, I began circling so that we could view the results, said Tibbets. We were not prepared for the awesome sight that met our eyes. The men saw a purple-gray mushroom cloud rising above Hiroshima, its top reaching the 3 miles above their plane. The cloud boiled and writhed, they said, like a living thing. Even more fearsome was the sight on the ground below, said Tibbets. At the base of the cloud, fires were springing up everywhere amid a turbulent mass of smoke that had the appearance of a bubbling hot tar. The city we had seen so clearly in the sunlight a few minutes before was now an ugly smudge. The entire city, said Van Kirk, looked like a pot of boiling black oil. A feeling of shock and horror swept over all of us, said Tibbets. Robert Lewis picked up his pencil and made a note in his logbook. My God, what have we done? After turning back toward Tanan, Tibbets wrote out a coded report and handed it to the radio operator. Clear cut, successful in all respects. Visual effects greater than Trinity. Proceeding to regular base. As the plane headed home, the crew felt a mix of emotions, including relief that the job was done and hope that the war would now end. But something else entered the mix, a thought Paul Tibbets would never forget. We were sobered by the knowledge that the world would never be the same, he said. War, the scourge of the human race since time began, now held terrors beyond belief.